tuning in to this week's edition of the Monday After Preacher podcast show, where our focus is holistic health in an evolving climate. We are in for another treat this week. This is our second show. I'm excited about this particular show because of our guest, who is a great pastor. He's a great preacher. He's an accomplished musician. He's an influencer, husband, and father. He is the pastor of the Place of Change down there up there rather, in South Florida, in Chesapeake, Virginia. And they are doing such an amazing work there in Virginia, in that particular city. He is Pastor Cedric Rouse, and he is one of my favorite preachers. Every now and then I shoot him a text message, call, just, asking him for tips concerning preaching. He has a unique approach to preaching. His hermeneutical style is amazing. He's a guy that I could just benefit from. I thought it would be good to bring him on to create some dialogue, because I know Pastor Rowson has wisdom and insight as it relates to us as leaders in this 21st century. How you doing, Dr. Rowson? Pastor Rowson, I'm gonna be calling you Doctor and Pastor Rowson. How you doing, Pastor?
I'm a few months shy of the doctor part, so pray my strength in the Lord.
Wow.
Man, I'm doing well, brother. Good to see you, my friend, and to be with you. I consider this an honor to be on the show with you, man, and just grateful for the opportunity.
Oh man, I'm excited to have you on with us. Let me ask you a question before we actually get into the conversation. Let me ask you, what are some of the things that you do to ensure your holistic health, as we talk about holistic health in regards to
so I think this subject is highly important, first of all, and the thing I would say is I consider myself a work in progress, and I have to say that because a lot of times when we sit down and we listen to people, we listen to gurus, we listen to people who have mastered something. And I think when it comes to holistic health, I don't think you can ever be a guru at that. I think you're always striving for better health, because health is a moving target, is not a fixed object. So some of what I do really kind of speaks to that, and we'll talk about some more, I'm sure, but I'm chasing the target. So in some cases, holistic health means rest. It means being able to stop. Right. In some cases, it's about pace, which is a lot of where I am right now, about setting a better pace at life. It includes all kind of regimens, whether it's the gym for me, whether it's intentional self-care. I have learned to work my self-care into, or make it compatible with, an awareness of my personality through instruments like the Enneagram and things like that, and kind of putting together the grid of what that looks like for me. Mm-hmm. Family time. Right. And of course, most importantly, which we'll talk about today, having an active and healthy devotional life.
Wow. So you talked about rest. I think that's something that we don't prioritize because we're always going. And so what does your Sabbath look like?
So I live my life on a grid, mm-hmm. meaning of rest. So I try to do 1 hour a day, at least 1 day a week, one weekend a month. And then I try to do sort of kind of like and that 1 weekend a month can also become 1 weekend a quarter in busy seasons. And then I try to do 1 month a year. So that's kind of how I play it. So on a weekly basis, obviously for most preachers, it's Monday. Right. And I've considered changing that, getting right into the ground of the week from Sunday and be off closer to the end of the week. But for me, Mondays work best. My Monday is my Sabbath day. It's my Selah. It's my opportunity to just, do nothing and to feel okay about it.
Wow.
It always helps when we had a fruitful Sunday.
Right.
It kind of helps justify the lazy Monday, right? But I try to live on that. And so I try to do a Selah during the day. That's the hour a day where I just stop, I pause, I think, I meditate, even if I have to break that hour up. But I just do something that takes my mind away from work. It could be a TV show, it could be reading. So I have the Selah once a day. I try to do the Sabbath day once a week. And then I try to do, in essence, the sabbatical, or just the getting away every so many times a year. and to see how that works for me, it helps. I mean, again, there are going to be ebbs and flows. Some seasons is worse than others, but
Yeah.
that's generally how I try to do it.
Yeah. And I think if we would prioritize holistic health or prioritize a Sabbath, I think it would be a great contribution rather to our holistic health. All right, I want to get into just the topic at hand that I feel that you have some wisdom to give us on this particular show. And I want to talk about how does the devotional life or the lack thereof affect the holistic health of a preacher. So I want to start out by asking, why is it important for us to commit to a regimen of devotional time as preachers, as clergy?
Yeah, but so my answer to that would be because we are first disciples.
Mm.
At least my prayer is that every preacher is a disciple. And so you don't commit to a devotional life as a preacher. You commit to a devotional life as a disciple of Christ.
Wow.
And so I think the real catch here is to make sure that as a preacher, you live out the discipleship walk, because inclusive in that would be a healthy devotional life. I don't read the Bible, at least I try not to go into the Bible looking for something to preach. I go into the Word of God looking for something to eat.
Right.
And if it feeds me well, then I tend to preach most effectively out of the reservoir of what I have consumed. The other thing is that as preachers, and I'm scared to use words like professional preachers and things like that, but preachers who preach vocationally,
Right.
We often are giving out, and even our knowledge of the word or our knowledge of God is always about pouring out. So the question becomes then, how or where or to whom do we put ourselves in a posture to be poured into?
Right.
And so I think that a healthy devotional life becomes the foundation for that. Bishop Walter Thomas says a healthy devotional life is a foundation for a powerful life. So it feeds not just my preaching, it not just my pedagogy, it feeds my life.
Right.
It becomes a means of communion, because I believe that we serve a speaking and a communicating God. You know, we don't worship a statue somewhere. We serve a communicating God. And so as I commune with God, then it puts me in a position to really cultivate and work on that relationship. And everything else I do then flows out of that healthy devotional space.
Wow. Wow. And I think you said, well, you did say something amazing about thinking about being a disciple first. I think because we commit ourselves to reading scripture for the act of preaching, that we forget rather that we are disciples first, which is a very important part, I believe, of our walk and our commitment to Christ and just our vocation as ministers of God, of the gospel. And that's one of the things that I think we have to get back to, like you said, just being disciples first. So we make sure that we ourselves are just kind of healthy spiritually. And so how does it affect our level of spirituality when we prioritize this over everything else? It's kind of segueing into that whole piece.
I think it several ways, but one, I think it becomes a great filter for us.
Right.
What it does is that the spiritual life becomes like a cleansing agent, almost like you exfoliate your skin. It becomes a cleansing agent so that by the time we step into sacred space to represent God, we bring God to people and not just us.
Wow.
So the preacher is not immune to pain,
Right.
right? We suffer and deal just like anybody else does. But a part of what this healthy devotional life does is it gives us space to cleanse,
Mm-hmm.
so that by the time we go back into purpose, we go back with a sound mind.
Wow.
John 10, Jesus shows us this. He's being pressed and pressured by persecutors and Pharisees and the religious elite. And the Bible says very simply in one obscure part of the text that Jesus slips away into the wilderness near the Jordan River where he had previously been baptized. And there he just sits.
Right.
He just sits in meditation with the Father.
Right.
And it's the result of his ability to steal away into that devotional, almost self-care space, that then he's able to withstand the persecution that is to face him in the coming chapters, culminating with Calvary. So
Right.
I think that it becomes a filter, and it becomes an enforcer for us, or sort of reinforcer for us to be able to handle what we have to handle in purpose.
Wow, wow. And if Jesus prioritized moments of just isolation for the sole
You got
purpose
it.
of self-care and just to get himself prepared, it is extremely necessary for us to do the same. And I want to kind of move into the whole spiritual health and being spiritually healthy as it relates to preaching holistic, being holistic when it comes to us internally. So, what would you say about our spiritual health and the devotional life being an agent to get us to a place where we're whole spiritually?
So I think that one, I think spiritual health is holistic health. And
Okay.
my perspective is that ultimately spiritual health isn't segmented. Some years ago, I started teaching our church. I said, for us to try to break away from the traditional language where we say, God is the head of my life.
Hmm.
I know what we mean by that. We're
Right.
speaking of lordship, but I suggested that people start looking at it through the lens of God being at the center, because the head almost depicts a hierarchy and thus a list. And so it's like, well, let me get the spiritual part out of the way first, and
Right.
then I can do everything else I do. But when something is centered, then
Hmm.
everything that shoots out of it is connected to that center. So
Right.
when Jesus is at the center of it all, then it affects everything. So that's one thing I would share about spiritual health. I think that spiritual health again reminds us, particularly in times of tribulation, in times of pressure, in times of pain, and in times of isolation. It reminds us to be saved,
Right.
and that ultimately we get to benefit from the very things we preach. You'd be surprised how many preachers preach stuff that we feel we don't get to benefit from, like
Right.
grace.
Right. Right.
Right? Where we often live in a fishbowl, expect it to be perfect, and the grace that we so lavishly preach, and even in other times give to others along their life's journey, we sometimes feel we're cheated of that. What prioritizing spirituality does is it puts us back in a position where again we get to receive and be recipients of the very things that we give out, and
Right.
it helps us so that our character will match the content
Hmm.
that we preach.
Right.
What creates the duplicity
Hmm.
is when we don't put ourselves in a position to receive what we preach,
Right.
and the pressure of life gets on and we turn into somebody else. So by prioritizing spirituality, it leaves me in a place where I'm able to claim the same blood you plead.
Hmm.
I'm able to take advantage of the same grace you use. I'm praying for the same patience that the congregants or the people who my ministry influences are able to.
Right.
And I've just put this in as a tagline, just as a footnote. I think effectiveness requires our parting with perfection.
Wow. that's
If
that's
we
good.
would just stop trying to pretend that we're perfect,
Right.
we could actually be effective,
Right.
because people know we aren't Jesus.
Right.
So if we just present ourselves as being in progress, that's why it was important for me from the very first question to say, hey, whoa, I have not attained it. I
Hmm.
am pressing toward that mark. I
Right.
think people can identify with that and they respect it. And most importantly, we all can grow together.
Right. So you said something that was so profound, our character matching the content of what it is that we preach. And I want to ask you this: being ethical in our vocation, I believe, starts with how we manage our personal time with God. Would you say managing our morality and the temptation to be unethical happens when we commit ourselves to being in God's presence? If that makes sense.
Yeah. So I think that, and this is just a worldview of mine, I think it's
Okay.
difficult to ultimately have a basis for morality
Okay.
without spirituality.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
And I've watched all types of debates and things. And this is one argument that the late Dr. Ravi Zacharias had when he would
Hmm.
talk with atheists and agnostics and others who deny the faith, question the faith. That his thing is, from where do you get your basis for morality? What
Right.
determines good to be good and bad to be bad? I think there is a connection between morality and spirituality. And I think that if I can, though, One, I think that we are ethically bound to seek to live moral lives. It just goes without saying.
Mhm.
But I want to broaden it because I don't think morals and character are synonymous.
Right.
I
Okay.
think morals become a great foundation for character, but
Mm.
I think character speaks to more than just what we would call morality. I have known people who were faithful to their spouse, or people who didn't actively practice idolatry, or
Mhm.
people who, in essence, let's say they didn't break any of the 10 Commandments. We would consider them to be moral people. They
Right.
were moral people, but they didn't have great character, meaning they weren't always good about their word. They say things and don't follow through. They overpromise and underdeliver.
Right.
Sometimes they throw others under the bus, unwilling to accept responsibility. They didn't break a moral code,
Mhm.
but they struggled in character. And
Right.
so my thought is that when it comes to ethics and living an ethical life, we can't be satisfied to just check a few morals off and say, oh, I didn't do this and I didn't do that and I didn't do that, I'm good. I think it requires of us to go beyond that, to constantly put on the altar every day,
Mhm.
Lord, how is my character? And am I representing you in a way in my life that makes me a good spokesperson for heaven?
Right.
And I'm not going to get it right every day,
Right.
right? I'm going to fail. But the point is that I'm striving for more than just to check off a few things on a list so that I can say I'm a moral person. I need to be a moral person, but I
Yeah.
also need to strive to just generally have good character.
Right. 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 Man, you're saying a whole lot, and just kind of to go back and to tie it in what you're saying, like if we first think that, first put in our minds that we are disciples first.
Yep.
I think when it comes to ethics and morality, I think if Christ becomes the center of it all,
Mhm.
I think it'll help us, keep ourselves. And of course, I'm not talking from a legalistic perspective. I'm really talking
Correct.
for myself that, that we'll be able to manage this life. And so kind of going into the whole work of ministry and how we can become so overwhelmed with the tasks. And then, of course, ministry has shifted totally for us. What do you say to that clergy person, or that preacher, that pastor, that's so engaged with ministry,
Mm.
that prioritizing a devotional life can seem to get kind of, lost in the mix? What would you say about to that person?
I would tell them directly, you're running on a battery that's gonna run out.
Wow. Wow.
So iPhone just did they just released a few new products, including the 14, right?
Mhm.
And I'm sure the 14 comes with a more expanded battery life. I don't care.
You're right.
I don't care how good the phone is. Work that phone long enough without plugging it in and it dies.
Right.
What we keep doing is we keep updating the software, but we never plug into the source.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we don't realize that the more you update your software, the more you increase your capacity, the more you learn and grow and develop tools and tips without plugging back into the source. Those added abilities only will drain the battery more.
Right.
The other thing I would say about that is you'd be surprised how many people take opportunities but don't know their assignment. One of the things I'm committed to at this stage of my life is doing only what is really my assignment. And I've learned that it's hard to be faithful to assignment and be faithful to ambition. So you have to determine which you're going to be loyal to, because ambition will make you take every opportunity, regardless to whether it's fruitful or effective or not.
Right.
Assignment makes you filter every opportunity through the lens of, is this what God wants me to do?
Right.
And is this the best use of what I have? The reason why understanding assignment is important is because when I know what to say no to, then my yes becomes that much more powerful, and
Right.
I'm able to squeeze within it the spaces to replenish.
Right.
So put the phone charger in the outlet, plug
Yeah.
back into God, and then also don't just spend all of your time and energy on everything that gets thrown your way. Any good baseball player who's up at bat will tell you you don't swing at every pitch.
Right.
So don't swing at every pitch. Every assignment is not for you. Every door is not your door. Every opportunity is not your opportunity. Serve, be faithful, and commit to that in which you can discern in your spirit is for you. And you'll know what's for you because it won't rob you of your devotional time with God. It, in fact, will force you to have more devotional time with God. It will promote more time spent with God. Anything that's pulling you away from God cannot ultimately be from God.
Right, right. So you talked about assignment, and the other word that you used was it ambition?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So how do we know, even within our vocation, how do we know exactly what our assignment is? How do we figure that out? Because I think that contributes to like you said, knowing what to do and what not to do. How do we figure that
Yeah,
part out?
that's a great question. With probably several tentacles of answers, but for the sake of this context, I think the answer is kind of sort of in the background of the question, or at least in the topic. I think the answer starts with seeking God. I
Right.
think that a devotional time with God will help you to determine. You remember when Samuel was dreaming and the Lord kept speaking to him in a dream. He kept going to Eli. He thought it was Eli. And Eli's like, I didn't call you. Go back to sleep. And finally, the last time he comes to Eli saying, I heard, Eli says, go back. And if you hear it again, then say to the Lord, Lord, thy servant heareth. So I think that God does speak to us within our time spent with God, dreams, visions, devotional time, Holy Spirit speaking and through answers to prayers and affirmation through things. So I think that can also help. But also, I think proficiency is a thing. I
Okay.
think my assignment is normally connected to something that I do well.
Right.
It's connected to some area where I've been graced. Uh, I know my assignment is not to sing because I can't sing. So it's no need in me chasing a recording deal where I'm a solo artist trying to sing, because
Right.
that's not my assignment. Now, you want me to put together some singers or make something happen while I'm in the musical background, I'm your guy. So I
Right.
think that a part of discovering assignment is to try to look at um, our proficiency. Of course, God's providence, right, and prudence, but also our proficiency. What am I good at? And then finally to evaluate the motive. What's my reason why?
Right.
What ultimately am I connected to the purpose behind a thing?
Right.
Am I driven to the cause? David knew Goliath was his assignment, even though he was only the lunch boy. And I ain't trying to preach the preachers today, right? But David's the lunch boy coming
Right.
to bring lunch and a message. And he ends up fighting. With the turning point of that text was when David raises the question to Saul, is there not a cause?
Right.
When he raises that question to Saul, it establishes for us that David isn't just fighting so he can get his rocks off or so he can show how strong he's been in the field.
Right.
He's fighting because there's a purpose, there's a cause, and
Right.
God anoints him with a supernatural strength to be able to take down something much larger than him
Hmm.
because there was a cause behind it.
Right.
You can't have a calling where there's no cause.
Wow. Yeah. Absolutely.
There's a connection between the cause and the calling.
Right.
Find the cause, and if the cause registers with your spirit, that may be an area of your calling.
Right.
So I think those are just some ways where we can differentiate between the assignment and just what's the ambition. Ambition is just it may offer you a paycheck. Ambition may offer you a position. It may offer you power. But if there's no purpose there, if there's no proficiency you bring to the table, and
Right.
ultimately, if the providence of God isn't shining favor on it, don't do it.
Don't do it. Don't do it. Wow, man. I feel like you're preaching to me.
Let me say one other thing if I can. I know time is of the essence. Let me say one small thing to that. I want to add another P,
Okay.
and that is priority.
Right.
So, and what I mean is, so my bishop says this. He says, uh, in order to succeed, you have to first determine what you're willing to fail at.
Wow.
All right. So you have to go into something with some non-negotiables. This
Right.
is what I'm willing to fail at. This is what I'm not. So let's say if you're a preacher who says, I'm not willing to fail at being very, very active in the lives of raising my kids. I'm not going to be the preacher who's never at the football game or never at the soccer game or has always got an excuse. Then that tells you right now, God didn't call you to be on the road all the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I may be able to determine my assignment. Now, maybe you have another preacher who doesn't have that kind of responsibility, or children are older, or dynamic season is different. So then they can accept a call that always has them away. But if you've got somebody who it eats at your heart because you can't be present or because you can't be active, even if it's in pastoral responsibility, you one of those pastors who you have to be at the hospital bed by the member's side, you can't send the staff to do, then you need to be home.
Right.
So sometimes our assignment as well is determined by what we prioritize. What am I not willing to fail at?
Yeah.
And what am I willing to fail at? And if it's something I can fail at, then somebody else can handle that. But if it's something that I know I'm not willing to fail at that, then that priority gives voice to the things that I take on.
Wow. And that's the, I think the major part of the prioritizing and proficiency. Wow, Dr. Ross, and I got two more questions now, and we'll be done. Why do you think it's a struggle for us to embrace this sort of discipline of the devotional life?
I think some cases, this is not a cookie cutter answer. It's not a one size fits all shoe, but I think in some cases it's difficult for us to embrace discipline altogether.
Yeah. Wow.
Sometimes it's hard for the gifted to be disciplined.
Yeah.
Because we're not able to explain a gift.
Wow. Yeah.
I've been playing piano since I was 3 years old. And I can't tell you how many times as a child, people would walk up to me and would literally rub my hands. And they would say, I'm rubbing your hands because I just want that anointing to rub off on me.
Right.
And the truth is that, or they'd ask me, teach me how to play. And at that time, I hadn't really developed much skill behind it. I only had a gift. And so I can't teach you my gift. It's a gift. Now, what I can do is here's where the discipline comes in. Extract the skills from my gift because I can teach the skills.
Right.
But that requires the discipline. Yeah. I think so. My point is, I think that devotional life is hard sometimes for people who are gifted because giftedness provides this unexplainable, intangible factor, the God factor, that too many of us rely on in an unhealthy way. So instead of studying and researching and doing the groundwork for a good, healthy sermon, you get a preacher who will wait till Saturday night, burn the midnight oil, haven't had any prayer time, haven't had any time to really study, but they get up with inspiration. And if the performance is good enough to cover up the lack of preparation because we're gifted, we're okay.
Wow.
And so sometimes you don't develop discipline until your gift won't let you win. It's when you lose the game that you start practicing. You see what I'm trying to say?
Yeah.
Sometimes God has to allow us seasons where we don't kill it.
Right.
Seasons where it kills us.
Yeah.
And then we learn to go back and do things the right way. So I think it behooves us, if we can get ahead of that curve, to develop the discipline before the defeat. Don't make defeat have to channel your discipline so that you go back and win.
Yeah.
Get the discipline from the beginning and you may never have to lose.
Wow. So I'll stop there. I'm not going to even ask the last. I think we should end there. Thank you. I don't even know what to ask. This an amazing insight. Our devotional life is by far one of the most important things, and I'm learning that as I journey through this whole thing called pastoring and preaching and leading people. That if I don't spend time with God, if I don't prioritize my time with Him, I'll be overwhelmed. I'll be, just being pulled every which way. But I think this conversation is necessary, which is the reason why I wanted to jump in on this conversation that I believe that we've already started. I'm just saying the clergy community at large. I want to just be, give back, well, add to rather, so that we could just keep the conversation going. Let me ask you before we close, what is one of your favorite books? Not the book you're currently reading. Give me one of your favorite books, Dr. Rouse, so we can benefit.
Wow. One of my favorite books.
Favorite book.
Can I ask the question differently?
What book have you read that has impacted you the most?
Yeah, so that's what I'll say, because favorites for me are, I do have some all-time favorites, but what I'll say right now, there are two books I'm really engrossed in right now. One book is called At Your Best by Carrie Newhoff that
Okay.
I'm reading right now. And that's would be how I want to end. The other book is I'm reading several books right now about the Enneagram. I've really thrown myself into the Enneagram. And I'm reading have recently read a book about the Enneagram called Take Care of Your Type. I do not have the author's name off the top of my head, but it's a book about the Enneagram and self-care.
Right.
Okay. And it is amazing. It's not
Okay.
even a long book. That's the crazy part.
Right.
But it's called Take Care of Your Type by Christina Wilcox,
Okay.
A Guide to Enneagram and Self-Care. The other piece though is At Your Best by Carrie Newhoff. He offers this principle, and I think it's been a good way for me to end because I started kind of here talking about pace. And what a part of what the book addresses is that you cannot fix an unhealthy pace with vacation. That a lot of times when our pace of life isn't healthy, we try to fix that by taking time off. And all that happens is you take time off, and then when you finish, you return to an unhealthy pace.
Right.
He says that the key for an unsustainable pace is a sustainable pace. That sometimes you have to do the hard work of literally scaling your life
Mm-hmm.
to dial back to a pace that is actually sustainable for you.
Right.
And he talks about discovering your zones, your green zone, your yellow zone, your red zone, green zone being when you are at your best. So when am I at my best to do my best? And out of a 24-hour period, then some people are morning people, some people are night owls, that kind of thing. What few hours of the day are you really at your best? That's your green zone.
Yeah.
The hours where you're semi-productive, you can get it done. It's not your best, but you can kind of make it work. That's your yellow zone. Your red zone, you have nothing to offer. And his point is that sometimes we put the most important work in the wrong zone. So we're trying to do the most important work at a time when we're not at our best. Now, to make that relevant to this conversation, let's consider that the most important work is a healthy devotional life. And the idea here would be that what hurts some of us is that we're trying to have a devotional life in our red zone time.
Wow. Wow.
That instead we ought to look at, when am I at my best? When am I the most spiritually productive? That's where you plug in your devotions.
Right. Right.
And you'll build a better consistency than trying to plug in your devotion. So, if it's easier, do it in the morning while you're combine it with another activity, while you're in the gym, while you're getting dressed, whatever. For somebody else, they may find that their green zone spiritually is right at night before I go to bed. Finally, the world is calm. My world is calm. The phone is off or on silent mode. And I'm able then to really commune with God in a way that allows me to sleep peacefully. Find your zone.
Right.
Because and this is going to sound antithetical to what we preach, but if Carrie's theory is right, that a vacation doesn't fix an unsustainable pace, then could it be that going on a 21-day fast is not going to fix an unsustainable spiritual pace? That you can fast, you can give up meat for 21 days of social media or whatever. Oh my God, I'm going to preach this. You're going to hear that again. But that what we really need is to change how we live. Right. I need to find a spiritual, sustainable pace.
Right.
And if I do that, if I seek ye first the kingdom and its righteousness, and all these things will be added. So check those books out, those two books.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so very much, Dr. Robson, for your insight and input on the Monday After Preachers podcast. As you can see, his wisdom and insight is incredible. Thank you so very much, Dr.